Hello everybody, and today I am starting a new reading vlog, another spoiler-filled vlog for the final book in the Dandelion Dynasty, so Speaking Bones by Ken Liu. If you don't know what the Dandelion Dynasty is, then click away because this is going to be a spoiler-filled vlog for the final book within the series. I've done spoiler-filled vlogs for all books within the series, so once you decide to tackle the series, you can definitely go and check out my spoiler-filled thoughts afterwards. But if you're just stumbling upon this now, then I would say, unless you have no interest in actually reading it and just want to know what's happening in it, click away now. But so yes, final book in the Dandelion Dynasty, and it is a chunker, 1,000 pages long, over 1,000 pages actually, and I have just finished part 1. Did I want to give an update earlier on? Yes, but also I have been sort of out of the filming mode again, so all week I haven't been updating even though I wanted to do a vlog, so yeah, I've been out of it a little bit. But so yes, in part 1 we are looking at Tara and Takfal mostly, so we're looking at them basically more or less after the events that happened in book 3. So basically they had just been found out, or their location had just been found out by the Liuku ruler. And so they are basically on the run, and so we're following them as they're just kind of running ahead of this army that is pursuing them, and basically having to find new locations to go and hide out at different occasions. At the same time, they are very much concerned about the fact that the Liuku are trying to figure out when the Wall of Storms is going to be opening, and they are unfortunately kind of betrayed by one of their own at that point in time, so one of the Agon, who they've basically been sending out to infiltrate the Liuku organization and kind of find out how much the Liuku know, is actually a double-crosser. So he is actually feeding back information to the Liuku, and because Tara trusts him too much, at some point she actually accidentally releases information about when the Wall of Storms will be opening. And so now the Liuku are also aware of D-Day, deadline day, of the day in which they will have to have an army prepared to cross over the Wall of Storms into the Dara Empire. And so we see them being pursued, we see them trying to find new places to escape, and so when they're being double-crossed, that is kind of the moment in which everything could have been over for them. However, luckily they do come up with a plan to escape from this location, because they basically sent their Garanafins off into a certain direction, a logical direction, along with a decoy rider, and then they actually go the opposite direction. They go into a sort of direction that has been taboo for the Agon people, because this is where the gods are supposed to be residing, and so they're not supposed to be crossing that mountain. And however, they decide alongside one another to do so. Tara has wanted to do so before, but then they've always kind of felt like that was, disrespectful of her to, imply it or to propose it. However, now they've decided that situation is dire enough and the plan really needs to be executed, so they go over those mountains, and then they actually reach out to a people who have basically been kind of neutral within this conflict, because they are living in sort of inhospitable lands that basically nobody's really all that interested in, and so they've basically been getting by just fine. However, they do have some inconveniences from the Liuku from time to time, and so the Agon are trying to approach them and get them on their side, kind of indicating this conflict will eventually touch upon you. Once the Liuku have kind of taken over the Agon, they will eventually also come after your lands, even if they're not all that interesting to them, even if they're quite inhospitable. And so they help them out to try and get to safer ground, because even though the Liuku leader has kind of given up on pursuing them, because they know when the Wall of Storms is going to be breached, he has been having a lot of defeats in his chase of Tara and Takfal, and so and his sort of the people around him basically are kind of saying there is no need for you to pursue her, we have the information that we have. So basically he just leaves it into the hands of one of his sort of like subordinates who kind of definitely wants to make it his mission to track them down and find them, because of course that is gonna reflect very good on him. However, he's not having a lot of luck with that, and so in the final sort of like section of this first part, we see a sort of chase across Icelands, and in that chase, unfortunately, the Liuku the Liuku kind of have to delve, like they kind of have to admit defeat, because they have been kind of like just like going as quickly as possible in the straightest path as possible, but that means that they've also been putting a lot of pressure on the ice, and so they fall through. Unfortunately, Takfal also falls through, and this was just like a very painful and cruel piece of writing from the side of Ken Liu, because Takfal kind of falls through, and in that moment I was like, oh my god, we're losing Takfal, he's doing that to us, what, why? And then they managed to get him out of the water, only for him to still die from the fever that ensues. So yeah, I was just like, oh, he's gonna die, oh no, my god, we're losing Takfal. So, oh no, we're not losing him, okay, we're saving him, and then, oh wait, no, we are losing him. So I did not appreciate that. Ken Liu, don't play with my feelings like that. So yeah, I am sad to see Takfal go. I thought that Dara and Takfal worked very well together. I do kind of think it's a good thing in the sense of like, once we go back to the Dara Empire and we have Dara and Zomi together again, now we don't have to like examine the sort of like relationship or the relationships dynamics that would have potentially existed between these three people, with potentially quite some jealousy between Zomi and Takfal over the attention of Dara. So at least we will not have that. But aside from that, I would have loved to see them working it out, because I love all three of these characters. And you know, even though Takfal originally was introduced to us, sort of like the annoying sort of like, you know, conscientious decision that Dara had to make to kind of sacrifice the happiness she would have had with Zomi in order to benefit her people by making this alliance. Ken Liu did very sort of like skillfully manage to, you know, get me on board for this relationship, build up this relationship as a relationship of equals, as a relationship of two people who care about one another, who have very different backgrounds and thought patterns occasionally, but who are open to listen to one another and to learn from one another. And so yes, I loved Takfal for that reason, and I'm very sad to have seen this character go. Now, weirdly enough, in this entire section there's also sort of like one chapter, I think, from another perspective. Well, there are chapters from other perspectives as well. I'll talk about those first, maybe they make more sense. And that is the chapters from the perspective of Tara's kids, because Tara's kids were abducted at the end of book 3. Now we see that they have also managed to get out from underneath the clutches of the Liuku warriors, and so that's why the Liuku had to do all this subterfuge to find out about the Wall of Storms opening, but they have managed to, you know, escape from them, and they are also building up their own society on their end. And the interesting thing there is that we visit this sort of like forbidden place, this place where only the gods are supposed to go, and there we find out about a part of Liuku history that has been not really forgotten, but like links have been forgotten. So we know we get to hear this story about how the people in the 5th age, so like the gods are making people, and then occasionally all people would kind of die out because of some sort of stupid reason, or because of the gods deciding that, you know, these people weren't worthy, and so they would make new attempts. And so in the 5th age, those people actually ended up exploiting nature too much, and building too much, abusing the resources of the land to such a degree that they ended up exploiting the planet and also dying out. But it then turns out that the leaders who have basically been responsible for all of this, the leaders who have kind of doomed humanity at that point in time were actually two heroes of the Ryukyu, two heroes who in the memory and the histories of the Ryukyu people are only spoken of in positive ways and about all the good things that they've done, but then we find out here that they actually are also the ones who are responsible for a great catastrophe for the Ryukyu in the past. So another case of us looking at history being misremembered or finding out, you know, like the truths that you've been told all your life aren't really fully true, or like history has kind of been diverted and partly lost, which is a theme that I always enjoy greatly in literature, and that definitely features in quite a fair few of the fantasy books that I consume. Yeah, and that leads me to talk about the one chapter I feel like that was from a different perspective, and that was like one chapter that we got from the perspective of Tanvernake, kind of looking at the dynamics going on her end of things. So she's on the other side of the Wall of Storms, on the Dara side, where she has this sort of like settlement, I guess, or it's more than a settlement, it's a piece of a region, let's call it, where the Ryukyu survivors are surviving at this point in time, and they have control over local population over there, and it's called like unreclaimed Dara in the language of the Dara people, and so she is over there with Crown Prince Timo, who seems to now have really kind of like resorted to depression and skulking, and is very unhappy with the situation that he finds himself in now, but also doesn't seem to be taking much action at this point in time. He seems to just be like going into his shell, his cocoon. Tanvernake on her end is kind of turning a blind eye to what is happening around her, and sometimes even steering certain atrocious events, because in the last book we saw that we had this general, whose name I cannot think of at the moment, who basically is kind of taking over leadership to some extent, because she's basically steering the government in a more strict direction, in a direction that is less lenient towards the original Dara people who live upon this land, and who sees more strict adherence to Ryukyu tradition, the Ryukyu way of life, even though Tanvernake and Timo were trying to steer the society towards a more lenient, a more sort of like compatible society, where both sides would kind of make compromises to their way of living to get to one sort of like a cohesive whole, and you know, she is still kind of in her head justifying the things that are happening in that way, kind of indicating, okay, I just need to make it through until the Wall of Storms reopens, because if the Wall of Storms reopens and my brothers comes through, I need to be strong enough, my people need to be strong enough for me to take the lead, because otherwise there is, as the way that she's kind of explaining it to herself or justifying it for herself, is kind of like, otherwise these people don't stand a chance, even though I'm pretty sure it's mainly because otherwise she doesn't stand a chance, but so she's kind of still justifying this as sort of like a very dark period that they have to go through in order for her to be able to reclaim like ultimate authority at some point further down the line, and then be able to make like more leniency possible towards the Dara people. And however, we see a lot of her internal thoughts. We can also very much infer that this is just like fantasies that she's telling herself, that she very much has lost control to this other woman right now, that she does not feel like she can go against this other woman, that her position at this point in time is not strong enough to do so. So she's kind of just going along with her, pleasing her in order to keep up the veneer of being in power, and for this woman to keep the veneer up. Like, this woman is not trying to steal her position at this point in time. If she were to put up too much of a resistance, then probably there will be a conflict between the two of them, with only one winner coming out on top. So yeah, that's more or less where I am right now. There was a one sort of like more scientific thing that also happened in this part that was quite interesting, is kind of looking at the communication of the Garanoffins and kind of figuring out how they can communicate at a certain frequency, and this is a frequency that they can feel through vibrations rather than that they can actually hear, because our hearing is limited to some extent, and so using that as a sort of tactical advantage. I always find that interesting when they do stuff like that, and throughout the series we've definitely seen them figuring out more and more about the anatomy specifically of the Garanoffins and how to use that to their advantage within warfare. And so I've definitely been enjoying that as well within this section. But so yeah, I'm curious to see where we go now, of course, because this whole section has been really focused on Thera and Takval's sort of like escape, and now that we've lost Takval, I'm curious to see like what direction the next section is going in. We're also getting really quite close to the opening of the Wall of Storms. I think when the book began we were 12 months away, and now we're like 6 months away. So originally I was kind of thinking that maybe we're gonna leave this to the very end of this book, and now I'm pretty sure that probably, if not in the next part, probably by the end of the next part, we're going to be opening the Wall of Storms and having a look on the other side. But maybe this next part is going to go over more into the Gia-Zomi territory of the conflict and Firo. Because I do feel like that even though Firo in principle plays a huge part within the big scale of events, we don't get to see all that often from his side of like what he's doing, because he has this sort of like secret army training facility where he's also now got further reinforcements that were sent there at the end of book 3. But I feel like it's kept very much in the you know, under wraps what is really happening there, so I wouldn't mind focusing in on that area a little bit. And that actually reminds me of the fact that in this section as well we also find out that Tan has some sort of secret facility as well, and we don't know what's happening there. So we have a lot of secret stuff going on. We have Gia, who has got a secret plan for which she is brewing up some sort of poison. We have Tan with a secret location, like a location where a secret is hidden. And then we have Firo, who is making a secret army of which we don't fully know the scale, the scope, the potential other sort of like secrets that they're hiding there. So let's find out in the next part. Alright guys, so we are like 250 pages further, a whole ton has happened. I will probably forget to talk about a lot of the stuff that has happened in the meantime, but I'm gonna try and talk about as much as possible. So the second part has started, and whereas I thought that Takval, I'm always unsure about the name, had actually not really passed away in the moment in time that I thought he had, because through some sort of like flashbacks later on we find out that he did like stay conscious at least for a little bit longer, or like maybe not, maybe there are flashbacks to before the scene we saw before. Okay, fine, whatever, let's put that chaotic thought to the side. But the first sort of like big thing that we go into in section number 2 is we go into the conflict between the society of the Agon that Tarval and Thera were leading, and the Liuku Thane Kuju, who was basically chasing them down, trying to defeat them while preparing at the same time to cross the Wall of Storms when that was going to be reopening. And so we'll have a look at the way in which that all goes down, and the way in which Thera was able to plan things in order to assassinate Kuju, basically by sending in these sort of like caskets that have their image on it, so the image of Tarvek and of her, and that are smuggled into basically this sort of like assembly hall, but are actually bombs in disguise. Like not all of them, but the bomb is in one of these caskets, and so she was hoping that, you know, he would be able to open some of them, see that they are legit, and then that he would only open like the big one, the one that had the bomb in it, at the moment in which she was, in the moment in which like they're surrounded by a lot of their warriors. And that worked out perfectly, but what I hadn't been expecting here, which is another instance of me going, I never know which directions these books are going in, is the fact that she has decided to actually stay on that side of the Wall of Storms. So she is now the leader of the Agon people, and she has decided not to cross the Wall of Storms. She is staying on the Liuku side of things. She is staying there to clean up house, I guess, and to make sure that the Agon people have the future that they envision, because she now does consider herself as, you know, being part of this group, of this community, being the leader of this group of people. She has done everything within her power to help the Dara people by preventing the Liuku from setting another troop into the Wall of Storms, from being able to reinforce the Liuku on the other side of the Wall of Storms. And so she is going to continue her life on this side. So yeah, that's very interesting, because that's like totally not what I envisioned. It's also not really what I want, because of course I've kind of, now that we have lost Tarvek, I'm like, I definitely want Zomi and Thera to get back together, and the fact that that isn't happening is interesting, of course, because it's like not the direction I expected things to go in, but yeah, that's also not exactly fully what I want. So, but maybe Zomi at one point will cross over to the other side of the Wall of Storms and reignite her passions with Thera. But so it's a very basic, small little discussion of that conflict, because I mainly want to be focusing on some of the other things that are happening. So on the Dara side, we once again have to deal with some annoying perspective of Jia, the Empress, who is once again like reinforcing her view of like staying clear of the Liuku on that side of the conflict, because she has some secret plan brewing and she just wants to keep on appeasing the Liuku, as she has said it to, I don't know who anymore. She's like, yeah, we cannot win from the Liuku, so we should just try and steer clear of them as much as possible and not like anger them. And that's, and you know, like her perspective just very much annoys me a lot of the time, as you will have known if you've been following my journey with this series. But you know, I was once again frustrated with her and with her choices to remain impassive, to keep on appeasing the Liuku. The peace treaty with the Liuku has expired at this point in time, so she is not under any sort of formal obligation anymore to continue providing them with sustenance, but however, she has decided to continue doing so. But I am happy that within this section we now see some form of manipulation happening on the side of Firo. I feel like we find out later within the section that he was kind of driving that, where they have been kind of enraging the populace, getting the populace to object to this pacifist way of dealing with the conflict, getting the populace to question their own morality by, you know, them standing clear, them not taking action. They are basically abandoning the Dara people who are currently living in unreclaimed Dara. And so they're kind of steering the pot, getting people to protest, getting a movement started, in particularly a movement started that centers around the sort of like disgrace or shame people feel about the way that veterans have been treated. And through this whole conflict, Jia is still kind of not willing to change her mind until one of her ministers, I believe it is, kind of points out to her like, but you have always been kind of endeavoring or pleading for a version of this empire where it doesn't matter who sits the throne, where the opinions and wishes of the person on the throne have no impact. However, you are currently also ignoring the wishes of the people. The people are speaking loud and clear about what they want, and you have been ignoring those wishes, so you have been that monarch that steers the country in a certain direction. And that finally gets her to agree to have some sort of a conflict with the Liuku, to agree to let Firo take the Liuku to war, to agree to stop the tributes to the unreclaimed Dara. So that means that in this 250 pages that I've read, we've also started a whole other conflict, a massive conflict with the Liuku, which is starting way sooner than I thought it was, which also makes me once again think, like, is this story once again going to surprise me with its direction? Because I had kind of assumed that this whole conflict between the two of them was going to be the culminating piece of this quadrilogy, but now I'm wondering whether we actually round off this big conflict between at least the Liuku have made it to this side of the Wall of Storms and the Dara people already within this second section, and we will have like a full 500 pages to dedicate to something else, potentially the conflicts with the Liuku that will be on the other side of the Wall of Storms, or will we just be going somewhere completely different? But I enjoyed the first section of this conflict between the Dara and the Liuku, just because there's such a nice emphasis on learning from past mistakes and on innovating. So we see this on both ends. We see Firo making huge advantage or making big use out of innovation, out of having learned out of the past conflicts. He mentions that it is like Jin Misoto, I think, who once said, like, you should never fight the same battle twice, meaning that, you know, if you've had a certain conflict, whether you won or lost, you should take lessons from that, and the next time that you are in a similar conflict, you should never like resort back to the exact same battle plan. And so he has learned from the past conflict, has made innovations, has worked with these sort of, to develop these sort of like robots, avians that can kind of distract the troops. He has built ships in a different way than the ships that they were fighting before. He's secretly been training Garanoffins. And so all of these innovations help to put them on an even footing with the Liuku people, and helped to make this a much more interesting conflict, where, while also kind of committing the same sin as the Liuku, where the Liuku were kind of thinking about this conflict in lines of like the past conflict and preparing for what they had to encounter in the previous conflict. And so their strategy has very much been centered around thwarting what they encountered so many years ago, and the Firo has kind of committed that same sin, because at some point we see that he was very much expecting for the Liuku to just stick to the same plan, to just not make any innovations, and to especially not embrace any of the Dara technology that they had seen in use, because he has seen their disdain for all things Dara, their disdain for lowering themselves to using the enemy's methods. And this definitely is in keeping with what we see from the leadership that is now in power in Unreclaimed Dara. However, he is wrong in that, because, I mean, this is purely on the initiative of Ghostan, who decides to use not only Dara prisoners in her warfare, but also she has invented some innovations to their side of warfare. So we do see both sides kind of using other tactics, using the tactics that the other side had been using before, using technologies or the warfare instruments of the other side, and bringing new innovations, which introduces a very interesting battle dynamics. And I thought that that made reading about this conflict interesting, because typically battle sequences are not my thing. You know, I very easily get distracted as well listening to a battle sequence, because I very easily stop caring about all of the specific action that is taking place. But because of this having to do a lot with like changing strategies, that actually really made me pay attention, or made me interested, at least thematically speaking, in sort of like looking at this side of this conflict as not just a way for them to figure out how to deal with what the other person, what the other side was throwing at them, but also seeing how each side had been learning from the other side and had been evolving as a consequence. But so yeah, I'm still in the middle of that conflict. I've had the first chapter about that conflict, and like a flashback chapter that was looking at the creation of these sort of like mechanical birds, but there's still a massive chapter to come that also has the same title. So yeah, this conflict isn't over yet. I'm definitely still in the middle of things. But another small thing that I want to talk about here as well that was discussed in these 250 pages is we meet the love interest for Firo, whose name I've forgotten, and I also don't fully know where she lives actually, but she is basically a newcomer to Dara. She's coming from one of the islands, I assume, and so she has basically been living as an outsider within Dara society. She very much admired Dara and the language of Dara from the outside, and so she wanted to become a member of the empire of this region, and so she moved there, and then she really felt like, okay, I'm Dara now. However, she was very subtly and not so subtly confronted with the fact that people do not consider her Dara, that even though she can perform as well as her Dara peers, people will still think that she is good for not being a Dara. But what I found very interesting in that particular section is that we look at her trying to use Dara methods to introduce a system of language into her home culture. And this very much looks at sort of the hierarchy of cultures and the idea that just because this Dara culture is seen as the higher culture, that certain aspects of it kind of are forced upon other lower cultures. And so in this case it is about the writing, which is a topic that comes through much of the Dandelion Dynasty series. It was also very much talked about within book 3. But so in here we also once again talk about the sort of like difference between the written language and the spoken language, and she is trying to kind of come up with a writing system for her language, whereas the people around her are also kind of saying like, but why would we need a written language? Why can we not just continue passing things down orally? Why do you want to submit our culture to the standards of this other culture that you have just been introduced to now? And she very much wants to do so, and I do agree that there is definitely a merit to having a written language system. But the main thing that I found interesting here is that she has this sort of like emotional attachment to the analogograms and is kind of trying to make a language for the language of her people that is modeled on that. And then at some point she comes to the reflection that she clearly is kind of looking at these logograms as being superior to a written language that more closely reflects the sounds that one hear. And then we get this sort of like little discussion about the differences between these two writing systems, which is very interesting from the perspective of the of Chinese language, because Chinese of course is a language that uses a logogram written system, and a lot of languages, especially the like Western languages that here in Europe we are most familiar with, will use the other type of system, the system that like has a symbol that represents a sound, whereas in Chinese your written character represents a concept, and there's a sound attached to that concept and to that character, but you don't use that same character every time for the same sounds. Let's say it like that. And I definitely, as somebody who has studied Chinese, think that this was an interesting thing to look at the difference between these two, and how when you're grown up in one way, you probably have a sort of affinity to the one system and consider that one system as being the most logical, the one that makes most sense, the one that everybody should be adapting. And whereas if you're growing up in the other system, you're probably thinking the exact same thing about that system. And so having her look at these two systems and how they're very different from one another, but both of them have a lot of use, or have their own merits. Like the logogram system is a system that has a lot of meaning associations, because a character is built up of these building blocks that have semantic roots. And so basically you can make all of this poetry by using characters in conjunction in a sentence that have semantic roots that kind of amplify the meaning or the imagery of the language that you are constructing. And so your sentence can become a poem in and of itself by using roots that refer to trees, to forests and stuff like that, all together in conjunction in a story. You're very much building an image. And that is what she is preferring at the moment. However, on the other end, especially looking at this sort of like discussion about written versus spoken language, a language system that uses a character root to represent a sound makes the written language closer to the sounds that you hear around you, and therefore is more closely linked to the way a language sounds, the way that people around you speak, and is more therefore a emotional sort of like link to the sound of a language rather than to the meaning of words. And so yeah, I thought this was an interesting aspect to look at, because it is something that I don't think I don't tend to see a lot in literature. And that is probably because most of the literature I read comes from a language system where the writing is the writing pattern. The written language is a language that is a representation of sound. I don't think I tend to read a lot from languages where it is different, like with Chinese and Japanese. Japanese is also a mixture of things, I think. I mean, I'm not entirely sure, I don't know Japanese, but it uses Chinese characters, but it also has grammatical characters. I'm not entirely sure what their third script is for, but so not entirely sure how it is with Japanese, but definitely from Chinese I read a little bit, but also like not that much. But so I thought that this was a really interesting thing to bring up, and I enjoy these things, these thematics running through these books, like the discussions on stuff like writing. There's a lot of sides passages that are being taken throughout this quadrilogy to look at certain things in more detail and to kind of have a philosophical discussion about them. One is writing, but there definitely are multiple things that happen like that throughout the series, where we're all of a sudden a little bit side-railed to have a little bit of a philosophical debate about some sort of a theme. And while that of course expands the series a ton, I also like that as a little bit of a breath of fresh air in between the horrors of battles and warfare and the strategic planning of these two different people. But so, let me get back to the battle sequence, and I'll talk to you guys in a few days when I've read a little bit further, probably about 150 pages further, because then I will have ended part 2. I have finished part 2. A lot happened. So, when I last checked in with you guys, we were like in the battle in between the Ryuku and Unredeemed Dara, and that battle has ended in the meantime. I'm not gonna go too far into like the rest of that battle. Once again, I enjoyed the sort of adaptation of technology, strategy and all of those things to better suit the enemy, or like to have learned from the enemy. And what I enjoy in this section as well is like Firo also really getting personally involved. We see a little bit of his leadership style as a military leader, where he is very much involved with the people around him. He very much knows what is going on within his ranks. He doesn't lead from a high position. He experiences life along with them, and therefore people also very much respect him. And during this battle, he's basically kind of been in the background, and so when he's called out by Ghostan to have a sort of like one-to-one battle, he definitely feels like the urge to comply. And I do love that he was kind of saying like, you know what, it makes no sense for me to like put the stakes of this conflict on this battle between the two of us when I'm so clearly winning at that point in time, you know, like in the moment in time in which you are clearly like set up for gaining the upper hand, it would be a strategically foolish decision to just like throw it all away in terms of a one-on-one competition that will determine the output. And I like that then Ghostan is like, no, it's not going to be about the output, but you know, it will be about like who gets to just like walk away. And you know, they have their battle, and Ghostan basically ends up delving like the underside, being the one who draws a short end, and Fear actually in the end saving her from certain death that basically was kind of instigated by the gods. But I love the sort of like mutual respect that is created between the two at that point in time, and that is just like a moment of showing like what would be possible between the Ryukyu and the Dara if these two were in charge. For example, if Ghostan was the leader of the Ryukyu and if Firo was the leader of the Dara, I feel like we could have at that point at the very least reached some sort of compromise, but probably already way earlier. Unfortunately, neither one of these are in charge, and so Ghostan returns to the Ryukyu, basically telling them like, you have 5 days to capitulate to Firo. However, the Ryukyu are very much like not going that route. The Ryukyu very much do not want to go that route. What I dislike very much within this scene is seeing Teemu being so not submissive, because he's very much opening his mouth here, but being beaten down by his wife, him finally standing up to her to some extent, and then her brutally shutting him down, brutally attacking him for raising his opinion, and so shutting down like the one few like sparks of outrage that he's still willing to show, whereas he's very much been withdrawing within his cocoon for the rest. But so the Ryukyu basically realize that they are in a desperate situation, and we have sort of like the two camps. So we have the camp of this like super fanatical who's saying like, okay, we keep on fighting, this is the Ryukyu way, we fight until the very last man, we fight until there is no more fighting possible, basically we fight until we die. Whereas Tan is like, no, we cannot do that. Tan is like, no, that is not the way. There also needs to be some sort of a future, and very much blaming this other leader for the way that she has steered the Ryukyu, basically indicating like, I should have stood up to you sooner. We should not have driven ourselves into the situation where we're so reliant upon Dara and their stores that we cannot survive without their tribute, that we don't stand a chance, and that now we are so dependent upon them that we have such a weak position within the capitulation talks. And that is when things go wrong, and when Nodame speaks up. Nodame, who is a Dara person, who appears to be a traitor, who speaks up because he has a plan so horrible that Teemu is first of all outraged, but that Ghostan basically accepts exile and wants nothing to do with this because it is so against what she says is the Ryukyu spirit. And yes, we find out what that plan is, because Nodame is sent as the sort of like negotiator to the Dara court to talk about their capitulation, clearly indicating that they will not capitulate, and basically sharing a message with Jia, which he doesn't really share openly with the court while it's happening. People are very confused about what's going on. There's some sort of like communication that seems to be happening between them without them really like clear communicating. And then when he has left, and people are just like, what has happened, because they were really like convinced like we've won this conflict, and now it seems like the Ryuku think that they are holding some sort of a trump card, find out that the Ryuku were basically threatening to mass murder all of the Dara people that they still have control over in one big sort of like drowning trap, as we saw at the end of book 2, I think. And yeah, that the Dara basically have to decide whether they want to keep the peace with the Ryuku and save all the Dara people, or whether they want to continue fighting and force this capitulation on the side of the Ryuku, but thus threatening the life of all of these Dara people in unredeemed Dara. And I like that we have these types of situations within the whole Dandelion Dynasty, where we get to see, like, we very much explore the complexity of decisions like this. We very much look at both the side of like the people who are saying like, yeah, we have to go for peace negotiations, we cannot jeopardize the lives of all of these people, we cannot put their lives in danger, versus the other side who's talking about the fact that yes, putting all of these lives in danger is a horrible decision to make. However, if we capitulate now, we also send a signal to them that they can continue with the cruelties that they've been going on for all this time. They and that's whenever they threaten with this level of cruelty, we will always capitulate. So I love that these are always kind of like nuanced conversations in which you see that there is like no perfect scenario, there's no perfect solution to the problem. It is very much a dilemma in which a choice needs to be made, and ultimately we choose to go for peace negotiations to save all of these Dara people, but you also, from the side, like emotionally invested as I am in this conflict at this point in time, and emotionally having waited for the moment in which the Ryuku are finally defeated, it feels very hard to give in to them, because they basically had won. It is basically just brute cruelty that is now earning them a way back. But the interesting thing about this is that there is this unspoken communication happening between Norame and Jia, and what I'm now unsure about is, because Zomi basically examines the whole conversation that happened between Jia and Norame and kind of sees how all of his moves and his references were basically forming a logogram that was basically, I think, referring, she interpreted it differently, but I think it is referring to the fact that Jia will swipe out the Ryuku in one big strike. But if that is true, that means that Norame is still acting on Jia's behalf, but it also means that, maybe not directly, maybe it was Norame's choice because he of course was not in direct conversation with Jia, but that they decided to keep this conflict going. Because if Norame would not have spoken up in the Ryuku discussion, then they would have felt like they had to capitulate, and they would not have come up with this idea of creating this big trap that would drown all of the Dara people. So that is what I'm still like confused about now, where I'm like, wait, is this what is actually going on? Because Jia is still kind of in her talks all about how she wants to do the best for the Dara people, and how it's not about her and her need for power and whatever, but if she in fact has been stalling this conflict in order to use her perfect solution, then that is just like her being blind to the reality and just like seeing things in the way that she wants to see it. Because she was already reluctant to go into the conflict to begin with, she was kind of steered into and pushed into going into this conflict. she always was just convinced that her solution, the solution she shared with nobody except maybe Soto, is the only right solution. And so perhaps she was surprised by the fact that Firo managed to defeat Ryuku. Perhaps she didn't even want to give these people the possibility of trying to prove themselves worthy of a peace, trying to prove that they could live in peace with one another. Perhaps she has always planned to just annihilate him as the safer option for the Dara people. But yeah, I'm fearing that it is actually like that, because I never give Gia the benefit of the doubt anymore. After book one, in book one I was still very much in favor of Gia. Gia was an awesome, strong woman, but starting with a lot of the choices in book two, I've been like, no, Gia is not somebody I'm rooting for. And now I'm starting to think that this is actually what she's been doing, that she's been like steering this conflict. She had to allow Firo his option, and then she thought he was just going to be defeated and that would teach him a lesson. And then he ended up being successful, and so she had to kind of steer the conflict in another way so that she could still get what she wanted. Basically, Zomi found out about a secret conversation between Norame and Gia, and about them kind of transpiring together in order to keep her in power and to have Firo, you know, like to keep Firo off of the throne. She tries to make it off of the island in order to go and warn Firo not to hand over power. However, she is caught out and she is taken captive. But Soto, who has always been very loyal to Gia and who has extracted a promise from Gia that, you know, if Soto told her it has to end here, that she would end things here, is about to go and talk to Gia about everything that's happening to kind of ease her mind and hear Gia's side of the story. When she overhears Gia asking somebody to call Soto to her and to serve one cup of tea, which makes her think, probably, most likely correctly, that Gia is about to poison her. So yeah, a ton of stuff has happened. Soto, as a consequence, goes and finds Firo, tells him that Gia is actually the person who has killed his mother Rosanna, and Firo decides that this means that he has to avenge his mother Rosanna. He will have to avenge her by trying to kill Gia himself. And yeah, let's see what happens now, because this has reset a lot of, well, not reset a lot of things, because I was just thinking, I mean, it was too good to be true, of course, that we would win this conflict with Ryuko at this point in time. So I was already thinking like, okay, are we going to go to the other side of the Wall of Storms? But I guess we are just like forestalling another potential conflict between the Ryuko and unredeemed Dara, because there's going to be a peace treaty now which can postpone the time in which both parties have to prepare for another eventual conflict between the two of them. So I guess we can still have this book end with a massive showdown between the two sides. But so yeah, for part 3, I don't know what's coming, guys. But the one thing I actually do want is, we had this character that we spent a lot of time with at the end of book 3. I want to say his name is Sabo, but it's probably not his name, and he had like 2 names, Kiri or something like that. He had like the Dara name and he had the Ryuko name. But so he's basically the love interest of Princess Farah, and I want to see him again. You know, he escaped at the end of book 3, and now I'm like, where is he? Why are we, like, it's been 500 pages, where is this character? He's been mentioned, maybe once or twice. Not even Ghoston has mentioned him, because she is his mother and she hasn't even thought about him once throughout this book. It's only been in a conversation between Farah and her friend that the suggestion of him has been raised, and I'm like, where is this guy? I love this character, I want more of him, I want him back. So that is my wish list for part 3. Alright guys, I'm here and hoping that my memory will like magically kick in, because I have not updated you guys in a while on Speaking Bones. I'm like over 800 pages in at this point. A full part has passed us by and I'm like, I don't know, 100 pages into the next part or something like that, maybe even further. But so, part number 3, we were mainly following Terra and Sabo, I want to say. So in Terra's perspective, we are, so Takval has passed away. Terra has decided not to jump over to the other side of the Wall of Storms, and so she is continuing to live in Ukyugonde is the name of that part of the world, right? And she wants to be the new ruler of the Agon people and basically try and create this sort of like lasting peace with the remaining Ryuku. She is having to kind of run away from the new Ryuku power, or the new forces that are trying to become the new power in Ryuku. And I'm gonna gloss over this a lot because I don't fully remember a lot of the details, but so basically she manages to thwart their attempts at capturing her, at killing her, by using this sort of like game that the Agon people, I'm not sure whether the Ryuku as well, but the Agon people definitely play. I think the Ryuku as well, actually, where they make these sort of like inventions as children, and this is like a play that they all do, and so she's used this sort of like kids play to make this massive invention that like imitates the gods. It's like a massive Garanoffen, and then she uses the like certain inventions to basically release a massive sound effect that kind of freezes and damages the Ryuku people that are trying to storm at the creature and kill it. And that is how she ends up being able to defeat most of that Ryuku army. In the process, I fear, because I feel like I kind of like this happened and I assumed that this was just like a person getting hurt, but now I'm like, wait, I don't think that this character has been mentioned since, but I think we lose the character who was the god that chose to become mortal, because she basically like sacrifices more or less her life as she's trying to keep this defeated general from reaching Terra and killing Terra. So yeah, I think we've lost her, and I'm like, wait, what? I wasn't even there for it? I mean, I was there for it, I just really didn't think that this was like the end of this character. But like when we flash forward a little bit further again, I'm like, wait, we actually lost this character. So I'm just like sad about the fact that I didn't even realize it in the moment. So it feels like it never landed emotionally, because I was just like it didn't happen, you know, in my brain. But so yeah, we are, so beyond that conflict, everything seems to be going well for Terra. You know, like she does have some grumbles about the way that she wants to do things, but she seems to be more or less accepted within the Agon people. However, when she's kind of expressing her opinions about how they should show mercy to the Ryuku, because what they want to create, or what she wants to create, is a lasting peace with the Ryuku, is a one people, or at least like a divided mixed society that can live in peace with one another. A lot of the Agon kind of like are rejecting this notion. They're like, this is not the Agon way, this is not the Agon fighting spirit, and we need to put these Ryuku people in their place, because, you know, like they've done horrible things to us, and basically they want to take revenge for that. And Terra trying to speak to them and make them see like, okay, but if we're going to go down that route, what we are just creating is a generation of Ryuku that will feel about us, Agon, the way that we feel about the Ryuku. We're just maintaining this conflict between the two people if we go down that route. And it seems like she probably could have gotten away with that if it weren't for the fact that Volyu is back and he is restaking his claim to be the leader of the Agon people. Yeah, I found that super annoying because I always hate it when we have characters who are manipulating past events in such a way, or like lying about past events in such a way to make them seem like the stronger person, or like just to make it seem like they are in the right and the other person was actually the one who was doing the wrong, when it's a character who like at that point in time was basically doing like nothing for example. I mean, I always dislike it. I always dislike winning through dishonesty, and so Volyu is very much like reframing everything that happened as being like Terra is, or like reframing, yes, the narrative, because yes, it was Terra who decided that they were not just going to attack at this grand meeting between the Ryuku, but they were going to wait until the Ryuku were going to go to Tatsun, I think the place is, so that they could strike at all the Ryuku at the same time, and like the Ryuku airships would be there, so they would be able to have like a full strike at the same time, which would definitely help prevent the Ryuku from being able to cross over the wall of storms. But the way that he is able to refrain that is like, you know, she refrained from attacking them in this meeting, and because she did that, and because she only wanted to attack these airships, so she only cared about the Dara people, she never cared about the Agon people, completely avoiding talking about the fact that he gave away the plot at this big meeting, that he is the one who betrayed the Ryuku, the Agon, which we then later found out that the Terra and Takval had basically decided not to reveal the extent of Volyu's treachery to the general populace, because that would just like demotivate people too much. But because of them not having shared this information, Volyu gets to walk clear, gets to walk away and not be held responsible for his actions back then, and be able to kind of reframe it as if he was the honorable guy all along, as if he was the one who you know, was betrayed by Terra, and as if Terra was the big schemer who was trying to get him to marry her, and when she wasn't able to do that, she married his poor weak son, whereas, you know, he was the one trying to marry her. So yeah, I very much dislike that. But so basically she ends up not being able to really properly defend what happened. The people who are able to back her up are unable to do so in a strong enough way, and especially since the sort of like priestess of this Agon people has been found killed, and then Volyu is able to put that on her rather than on him, who is the real responsible for all of this. So yes, in the end they have to flee in order to find a new place where they will be starting a new society on their own. And then I got my wish. Savo's back. We've been following him as well, and so basically we kind of go back in time to look at what he's been doing while all this has been happening. And so basically he has been in a society that is basically just like let's call it a monastery. I'm not entirely sure that that is the case. A monastery that's basically just all about peace and just about like going on with life and just like supporting people around them. There are many people there who are, for example, like trained doctors who are taking care of the people, and he has basically just found sort of like his path within the society, his contribution to the society, and so he becomes somebody who is helping restore manuscripts. I love that section a lot because we see him developing a sort of system to more easily be able to copy the analogograms. And I just love that section because it was a lot about sort of like writing and the idea of the soullessness of like a copied down text versus the personality that people place into their handwritten text. And I can tell you that that is definitely a much bigger factor with logograms than with like you know, like our written Western scripts, which are scripts that copy sounds rather than logograms, which are scripts that copy meaning. This was definitely a big hurdle when learning Chinese. We definitely, like, we of course learned to handwrite, but our handwriting was always like as close as to the actual logogram as possible, you know, like it was a neat a neat copy of what the sort of like typewrite character would look like, versus when you would then occasionally in our reading classes we would have to read handwritten notes, and then, you know, it is the way that when we are writing by hands, you know, you speed up and like your characters kind of flow into one another to some extent. You have a way of writing a certain letter, like the letter G, for example, will be very different for certain people, and then in a logogram these strokes also kind of flow into one another, and it's another skill that you have to learn of trying to find back the character that is represented in the manual representation of that. And so I love this section where we're looking at, you know, like the big uses of having a typewrite sort of character, and this system that can be used to easily copy and that can be used by people who are feeling like their own writing is like illegible or is not pretty, versus then, you know, these other people who are very much invested in, you know, the soul that comes through the manual writing of text. I feel like there was something else that I found really, really interesting about that section and that I just no longer remember now. But so basically that's what he's been doing when he has a visitor and he is visited by Princess Farah. So we have our lovers back together, and I actually don't fully remember whether they decided on what they were going to do at the end of that book. But yes, I was just very happy to see them together. But I do believe they're leaving together at any case, but I'm not entirely sure where they're going, whether they're going to try and find Firo maybe. But so yes, they are encouraged to kind of leave the monastery at the end, because they're like, yes, your path leads further than this, you know, we have loved having you within our society, but you know, your pathway clearly leads elsewhere. So yes, I enjoyed that part a whole lot. And then we have moved on to the second to last part at this point in time, so part number 4, where we've been following the perspectives of, well, not really of Gia herself, but we've definitely been looking at the Gia side of the conflict. We've been looking at the Tanvernaki side of the conflict, and we've had glimpses of Firo as well in there. And basically what's starting to unfold now is some sort of like civil war on the side of the Dara Empire. However, it isn't necessarily a civil war. It is one because, you know, Firo is trying to get to Gia to be able to assassinate her, to revenge his mother who was killed by her. However, he wants to avoid as much bloodshed amongst the Dara people as possible. His goal is just Gia, and if he can do so without anybody else getting hurt, then that would be fine by him. However, of course, from the side of Gia's people, this is very different, of course, because, you know, like, he is coming after the ruler of the Dara Empire, so he is a rebel, and so this is a civil war because he has rebels who are fighting alongside him, and so a massive conflict is about to burst loose. I like that Firo has clearly been thinking a lot about his strategy here and thinking about how people will think about his strategy. So there's a lot of this sort of like reverse psychology stuff, you know, where he's thinking like, okay, this person has been trained by Bemuzed, so she will think in this way, where she's like, he has been trained by Bemuzed, so he will think in that way. And so he has been like 2 steps ahead of that, being like, okay, she is going to think that I'm going to do this, so instead of doing this, I'm going to do that. And so he has made it into the Dara Empire in any case. They have seen through part of his plan, and I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen. I'm fearful that we're going to have sort of like a visitation by the spirit of his mother, who will tell him that, you know, like, it was for the best, that Gia was like the better wife or something like that, because I do believe that they had some sort of a conversation at the end, right, where Rosanna basically kind of like stepped back and Gia was kind of like taking the forefront. I could be misremembering this at this point, but I do believe that there's some sort of a sense of embracing this event at the time in which it was happening on the side of Rosanna, that she was kind of like that she had kind of like come to terms with this happening before she was killed. And so I'm fearful that something like that is going to happen, where, you know, like Firo is made to not kill Gia as a consequence of that, because, I mean, Gia is a mastermind, and I do have to admire her for the skill of her planning and strategizing, but I do not admire her for many other things, because what this section has also shown is the plan, finally. So we've seen glimpses of Gia's plan. We knew that Gia was creating these berries that basically create a sort of like addiction that leads to the person's death in the end, and that she was like perfecting this, and I was like, oh my god, she's gonna create some sort of a mass genocide somehow or something like that. But what I actually hadn't really realized at that point in time yet was that she was basically importing these manipulated berries into what's the name of it? Rui? Yes, Rui, right? Where the Liuku people are currently having their own separate society, that she was importing these berries into there, or like smuggling these berries into there through smugglers and pirates. We knew that she was working with pirates and smugglers. I don't feel like we already knew that they were smuggling into that place, and basically she's been supplying them with these manipulated berries to create a higher level of dependency on the berries, because the berries are manipulated to be much more potent than the original berries that were coming from Ukiukonde. And so for the Liuku people, these berries are sort of like religious. It's like a way to get closer to their gods when they get into this high as a consequence of consuming the berries. And so it is part of their society, part of their traditions, and so they've been consuming these berries. However, they haven't, as they are against cultivating the land, they haven't been cultivating more berries. Their supplies have been dwindling, and then they've very much relied on this smuggled in supply that has magically appeared to them. And because they've been feeling on a high with, you know, like winning all these battles, oppressing the Dara people amongst them, they've been having a lot of parties in which they've been consuming these berries en masse. And so basically most of the Liuku are reliant on the consumption of these manipulated berries at this point in time, when all of a sudden their supply cuts off, because Gia has the entire supply destroyed upon Dara in order to, and thus not being able to smuggle anything out of Dara into Ukiukonde anymore. All of a sudden the Liuku are starting to have severe withdrawal symptoms. Society is at the brink of collapse. They like get another final supply or something of the berries, which they have to kind of redistribute very carefully. Gostan is finally brought back to a position of somewhat power because of the desperate situation that they are now in, and she finds a sort of like last supply of these berries somewhere. However, this supply is the original supply, is like the original plant, and so it isn't as potent as the new version is, and so it actually tends to flare up the need for these berries in the end. And so we very much see a population enthralled by this drug, very much reliant upon this drug at this point, and very much collapsing as a consequence of no longer having access to this. So this book heavily takes its inspiration upon the Opium Wars and the introduction of opium by the English into China. And yeah, so I say that I admire Gia's planning, the fact that she had this master plan all along in which she was going to be submissive towards the Liuku while actually poisoning them in secret, and making sure that in the long run she was going to end out on top, and the Liuku were not going to ever see it coming, because she was just like they would see her as the weak dog who was just basically acquiescing to their every single request, and while she was actually just playing the long game all this time. So I admire that. I admire that cunning, that diabolical plan, but the plan is definitely horrible, of course. I mean, she has created a huge dependency, and the description of babies whose mothers have been consuming these berries, and so these babies are born with a dependency upon these berries. Like, that's just horrible stuff, you know. And real life stuff, because it actually happens. But so yes, I admire the cunning in a objective way, but yes, it is not an immediate genocide the way that I thought it was going to be, more or less, but this is definitely, and I mean, looking back on it, it's very obvious. Like, of course, yes, she was making some sort of, I thought she was making like a massive poison, but no, of course she was making a drug. That was clear because of the amount of time for the withdrawal. But like, yeah, I just saw it as an immediate genocide, but it's even more diabolical because these people are suffering for a very long time before they end up dying because of the consequences of withdrawal. And so, yeah, it is even worse, you know, like genocide is of course always horrible, but a long drawn out genocide is just like diabolical. It's just like pure evil. And so, yes, it is probably the smart plan, the smartest way to deal with the Ryuku, but it is also the least honorable one, and that doesn't really surprise me about Gia. But yeah, and that just makes, and so that's what I was also referring to when I said in that section where we have this, where we see this like unspoken communication with Nodame and Gia, is that she had the power at that point in time to end the conflict between the Ryuku and the Dara by not giving in to the Ryuku threats, which we've seen by now as well, which were idle threats because they did not have the material at hand to massively kill off all the Dara people in Rue. But Nodame basically told her, like, you can just go ahead with your plan to swipe them all out. And yeah, I think that is just like, she had the opportunity then to back away from this plan. But she is just convinced in her thought that the Ryuku can never change, that relationships between these two people can never become normalized, so that she just didn't even want to take the chance on this plan. She would rather have millions of people die at her hands than take a chance on finding a solution, a diplomatic solution between the two people, and potentially seeing that go down the drain somewhere further down the line. But so yeah, Gia. I don't like this character at all. She's like, that is the type of thinking that I really like. The type of thinking where people have like no hope for the ability of people to change over time, for the ability of people to tolerate one another or grow to understand one another. Yeah, that's just a level of jadedness that I find very annoying, that very much clashes with my own sort of like optimistic views for people and their ability to learn to empathize with one another. So yeah, that's more or less where we are, except for I need to talk more about the Rue side of things, I guess, because on the Rue side of things, I said things are going to full chaos, and we have these confrontations between Kutenrovu, I think her name is, which is the sort of like extremist general who has basically been leading the Rue side of things for the past few years, who's basically been very much pushing for a more Ryuku-centered way of working, for harsh punishments of the local population, for no capitulation, fight on until the very end, the Ryuku spirit must survive. And Tan Vernake, who's the de facto leader, who's basically been giving in to Kuten's way of doing things because she's fearful that she will lose control otherwise. And then Gostan, who was very much like pushed down, lost kind of her status as a general because of being more sympathetic to the Dara people, for being in favor of lesser punishment for Dara people and finding ways to co-live with the Dara people. And basically in the end, Tan finally kind of stands up to Kuten and is like, no, like, you are like thinking crazy thoughts, because this Kuten is like a fanatic, basically, you know, like they have almost no supplies to keep going. The local populace is at the brink of rising up and rebelling against the Ryukyu. They are very much under the influence of this drug that is absolutely destroying their populace. And so Tan wants to go to Jia and basically beg for help, for relief. However, this clashes with Kuten's view of like the Ryukyu are the strongest people, the Ryukyu are the chosen by the gods, the Ryukyu are like the fighting spirit of the Ryukyu is the most important thing possible. She is so convinced of Ryukyu supremacy that she cannot wrap her head around the idea even that Jia, a Dara person, would have planned this whole berry situation. Because that would clash with her view of the gods favoring the Ryukyu, and so she just wants to push even harder. Like, she's been feeding real people, she's been feeding Dara people to the Dara slaves, because, you know, she's been given the order to feed them, and she's like, well, I'm not gonna feed them quality food, right? Because they're just Dara slaves. She's so fanatic that she just keeps on pushing, and finally this makes Tan snap. However, that is not a good thing, because Kuten is the type of fanatic that you, I fear, have to, like, I'm not gonna say you have to kill them, even though in this case it would have been better, I guess, but you have to at least control them. You have to lock them up, I guess. Like, you maybe after a while you can, like, after speaking into them and seeing a change in them, you can release them again. But a character like Kuten is too dangerous to just say no to and walk away. You know, she is loyal to her rulers, but her ruler has just completely disrespected her, done something that in her mind is very un-Ryukyu. There's no way you can expect her to still be loyal to you, you know. She is a flame. She's a spark that's about to burst into flame. I mean, she's already been a flame for a while, I guess. But this is like really, you cannot expect that you can just tell her that's not how we're gonna do things, and that she's gonna let things slide like that. This is the reason why, from the very get-go, Tan has been subjecting to her, because she feared that Kuten would otherwise take control over, make a coup and like step over her role, and I don't know why she's so naive to think that, you know, Kuten is not gonna try and move her out of the way. You've seen how fanatic she has been. You've seen how fervent she is in her responses. You've seen the horrible things that she can do to people. And why do you then not think that if you are going to form an obstacle for her, that she's not gonna remove you? So yes, we end up this, I am currently at the section where Tan Vernake has just been killed by Kuten Rovo. Kuten Rovo has also passed away because Rame, who was basically conspiring with her, has basically killed her off. And then he reveals that basically he's been working for Jia, and so he wants to return Timu to his mother. But Timu is like, no, I am finally now in a position where I can be of some meaning to the Dara people here. I want to rule this society. I want to step in where Tanfernake has left things off, and I want to finally make this dream of a Rui society where the Ryugu and the Dara can live in peace with one another a reality. When Nodame kind of realizes, like, you know what, I actually don't need you. You know, like, I actually don't need you. I actually can make it seem as if all of you died at the same time and can just try and manipulate your kids as a way for me to make it onto the throne or into the good graces of the throne or whatever. But so that's where I am now. This was a big update. I don't know how long this video is going to be again. I don't know how I did with the first book where it was just like a 30-minute video and now we're to the point where I don't know how long this one is going to be. The previous one was an hour and this update has been half an hour already. So yeah, my apologies for the length of this. And yeah, I can now listen to the rest of this book again without feeling guilty about not having updated you guys. So, okay, so guys, I have finished it. I have finished Speaking Bones by Ken Liu. I have finished The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. So this was a massive endeavor that actually kind of flew by, I almost want to say. Like, it definitely didn't always feel like that, of course, because when you're like in the middle of, like in the very beginning of a 1000-page book, it doesn't feel like you're making much progress in a very fast time. But ultimately speaking, I don't think that I spent so many days on this considering the amount of pages that it's represented. But so yeah, I am very happy that I have finished this book. I enjoyed it a whole lot. And let's talk about the ending, I guess. So I think when I last left off, like Firo had kind of like just made his way into the palace through some sort of like a subterfuge. He'd kind of like gone disguised, and because everything was kind of kept in darkness. What is with his hair? Everything was kept in darkness. As a consequence, it was more easy for him to pretend to be somebody else, and so he made it into like the inner sanctum and was able to confront Gia. And so Gia is able to is like talking to him, and then her annoying side comes out again, because for 1 second she's like, oh yeah, maybe he is indeed ready for the throne, maybe he is ready for this responsibility that I've been thinking that he was not ready for, because indeed he has on his own stepped away from certain decisions that I thought he would never be able to step away from. He has been able to say like, no, we will, you know, like we will stop this conflict here and we will pursue peace with Ryugu. And maybe he's finally like maybe he's finally like matured into the decision making. Maybe he is ready to make these big decisions that you need to make as a ruler. However, when she asks him for his motivation, which is basically just like honor and stuff like that, and the fact that he felt like he could trust the Ryugu to build this lasting peace with one another, or at least the general that he fought against, then she's like, oh yeah, no. This guy is not ready. This guy has done it for all the wrong reasons. This guy can never be the cutthroat type of character he needs to be, because if he had been wrong about that person, then that would have meant that the Ryugu would have like come back and fought us in earnest, and you know, they would have just betrayed us down the line, and then we would have been far worse off. So yeah, Gia, I understand that you have like the worst possible view on humanity and on other civilizations, and sure, it was correct when it came to Kutenrovo, but like, please, just because somebody else has done things differently or has made decisions for different reasons than the reasons that you would be making them for, does not mean that they're not ready for the throne, okay? But so, basically, she lures him into this trap. He falls down into some sort of a hole where he's basically now entrapped. And her plan is to kind of like go through with whatever plan she has and to calm him and basically like slowly get him to see her ways. However, she was not prepared for the fact that he had sort of like a kill switch with him, and so he dies in self-sacrifice, hoping to take Gia with him, which doesn't end up happening because her sort of like loyal bodyguards kind of protect her from the most, like from the worst of the blow. However, this does create a problem because the Ryukyu, who are now like really desperate for survival because of the harsh reality that they're facing with this addiction to these berries, they are basically ready to strike a deal with the Dara Empire. However, they don't want to strike a deal with Gia because they have realized that Gia is the one who's been basically creating this problem from the get-go. So Gia has been presenting herself as being somebody who's willing to deal in peace with them. However, in secret, she is behind their back been poisoning them and setting them up for absolute destruction. So they don't want to go to Gia, they want to go to Firo. However, of course, Gia cannot present Firo to them because Firo has passed away. And then we get to like sort of like the final part of Gia's plan, which is basically to have her be deposed and to have others think that it was like their choice because they wouldn't just accept it if she were to just step down. And so we have the people rebel and basically have Gia deposed, and Farah now becomes the new ruler with Savo by her side, which is perfect because Savo is Ryukyu born and is somebody who is Ryukyu born but also is tolerant towards Dara Empire, has grown up being taught by a Dara teacher, has embraced a lot of Dara culture as well. So yeah, that is more or less what I want to be talking about when it comes to this book, because we do, of course, have a lot more going into like the rounding off of the storylines. We do have a whole sort of like end section that goes over the developments of the islands that come after that, and sort of like the not really like the difficult piece that is being maintained. We read from the perspective, for example, of a mother and her son, or like it's not really her son, I think it's like a boy who was traumatized during war that she's taking care of. And so we see, for example, that this boy is like heavily traumatized from what he's witnessed in the war and what the Ryukyu have done to him, and then therefore kind of show, and then she's kind of expressing her discontent over the fact that the Dara have allowed the Ryukyu to go kind of scot-free, to not have any reprimands or any charges laid against the Ryukyu for the acts that they've committed throughout this time. And then we also, for example, at a further point in time, see this sort of like new rising star in the political administration who wants to make some changes to some of the initial laws that were presented when the Ryukyu had just like submitted. Basically at that point in time there were rules set up that would give them like extra points when they participated in the royal examination, because they would need more Ryukyu in power in order for them to get to a more equal society, a society that is being shaped by both Ryukyu and Dara people. And other advantages were like certain rules that were, certain financial incentives that were given to mixed neighborhoods. And at this point in time that we're reading from later on in the book, this has basically just kind of led to like strategic choices where families who are of mixed blood will be like, yeah, if we say that we are Ryukyu and then our neighbors say that they're Dara, then, you know, we get this sort of financial incentive for the fact that we are two differing people living close to one another. So we do go through a lot of those things still in that final section, but I gotta say that for me is always not that interesting. I am somebody who kind of prefers an open ending to some extent. I don't really like for my stories to be fully rounded off. And so we do see like Farah has eventually kind of given up her rule and is just passed on to the next person in line. And so at the very end of the book we are seeing like, I don't know, the grandson or whatever of Gia probably, or something like that, is currently emperor. And we do have this very sweet moment in which Terra crosses over the wall of storms again and reunites with Zomi when they're both like very much at the end of their lifespan, where they're very much old and, you know, in wheelchairs and able to see one another for one last time, or it feels like one last time, because it feels like it was like implied that Terra was like at the end of her lifespan. But yeah, we get a lot of sort of like inclinations of the directions that people's lives take after the events of the Dandelion Dynasty. So Zomi, for example, becomes a teacher who has gone to unreclaimed Dara in order to set up academies there and help steer the population there towards an education and pass on the teachings that she was taught by Wanju. We see that Aya, what's her name? Aya? The daughter of Jin Mizode. Aya? Yeah, I think Aya, her name is. She ends up being like fired as a general, which is like a blessing in disguise because she basically never really wanted to be so. It was just like the pressure put on her, and so she makes this sort of like furniture business afterwards. But the real problem here is Jia, guys. So Jia basically got her entire plan worked out perfectly, with the exception of Fira passing away. So she was able to poison all the Liuku. She was able to destroy the Liuku through this poison and break down the society through the chaos of the addiction that resulted from this. She then got her wish of making sure that it didn't really matter who sits at the throne by having her removed from the throne and improving or like strengthening central governance versus the power of the emperor. And she walks away scot-free. Like the one downside, I guess, is the fact that people find out about what she did, because she was keeping this secret. She was taking that secret to her grave. She was not planning to share this secret with anybody, but Kogu Yellow. So her Prime Minister Kogu, he has figured out that she was behind all of this. He has figured out that that was what she was doing, and he is begging her for an antidote. And then we get to why I don't like Jia, because Jia, they've won. You know, the Liuku are at their feet. The Liuku are desperate, and Jia is being asked to provide a cure. And before Kogu comes to her, she's like, I have nothing to do with this poison. Like, I am not responsible for this. And even though her grandchild is basically dying from the consequences of this addiction, she is like, yeah, I cannot falter, I cannot be weak, I have to be strong and not give in to the weakness of like feeling for family ties. So she persists in her sort of like telling of like, no, it wasn't me, I don't know what you're talking about, until Kogu kind of clears up that he realizes that, you know, like she was the one who was responsible for it, and also kind of indicates that he does know that there is like or that he knows her well enough to know that she will have foreseen the existence of an antidote. And finally, he is able to convince her that, you know, this is what Farah wants, and this is what the people want. You want a rule where it doesn't matter who sits at the throne, and this is what we all want. We want a solution to this addiction. And then she finally gives in. But she was very much persisting in this sort of like idea of like, we need to fight the Liuku until every last one of them is dead. There is not a single Liuku person who is innocent. There's not a single Liuku person who is worth surviving this ordeal. So she was very much like going for genocide. She was very much going for broke and like, let's destroy them all. And that has been my big problem with her from not the beginning, unfortunately, because I liked her in book 1, but she has this sort of like, she had this feeling like it shouldn't matter who sits the throne of the Dara Empire. Like the people at the top can rage too much destruction and have way too much impact on the people at the bottom. But she, on her end, has had a massive impact, to the detriment of the Liuku at the very least. Maybe not to the detriment of most of the Dara, though she is also very much responsible for a whole lot of Dara suffering on unreclaimed Dara, because she very much manipulated the way that things were going there. There was a possibility for a more peaceful cohabitation between the Liuku and Dara to thrive over there if it weren't for Jia's meddling. And she has always been like, yeah, the person at the top has too much of an impact, and it shouldn't matter who sits the throne. The power of the central power needs to be brought down. But she was exploiting the central power to such an extent, and the way that she's constantly like talking into her head is like, I am making this sacrifice for the good of all. I am becoming the very thing that I despise, just so that I can leave this society in better hands afterwards, just so that I can leave a better organized society afterwards, as if, that was like a grand gift that she was giving to the people. Whereas, she is acting for everybody, destroying lives, and thinking that it's the only way. It's the way that it has to be. She's never considered that another way could be the way. She's never listened to another way. She's not ever been open to the option of going about it another route, or even of opening up debate about how to do things. And I've repeated this many times, so I'm just repeating the same rant, I think, but that is my main issue with Gia. And so at the end here, you clearly see she knows that what she's done is horrible. She's committed humongous war crimes throughout the series, and she's like, yeah, I don't want, like, I've taken all the guilt on me. I did it and I kept it a secret so that you guys didn't have to feel guilty. And Kogo's like, yes, but we do feel guilty because we knew, not necessarily we knew exactly what you were plotting, but a ton of them knew that there was something going on, that she was plotting something, and they were turning a blind eye. And so by not telling them, she's also made them accomplices, because she's allowed them to turn a blind eye, knowing that horrible things are happening. And maybe if she would have been open to them and would have given them the option to weigh in, then at least they could have tried to change her mind, or at least they could have had these sort of like lesser conscience of knowing that they have decided along with her that this was the best course of action, in spite of what they were actually causing. But so, yeah, Gia, no. She is always saying, let history be the judge, and the annoying thing about this book is that at the end it's like she is a controversial figure, because people find out about her actions and about her actions towards the Ryukyu people in the Dara, but she remains a controversial figure. She's not fully judged yet, but it does repeat at that point in time, like, let history be the judge. And I'm guessing what Qian Liu is doing here is letting us be the judge. And in this case, I'm gonna be like, no. I say, you were wrong, you're a horrible person, like, I like, as I said like this to Kitty the other day, I like my cold, calculating, cunning characters who kind of basically are like master chess players who see 20,000 steps ahead on the board, but I just prefer them with less like cold-hearted war crimes. Like, don't use your powers for that, my admiration for your forethought disappears when your forethought is basically used to orchestrate the mass murder of the people. Okay? I had to read that chapter about those babies who were crying in this ward because they were addicted to these berries, because their pregnant mothers had eaten these berries. That you do not walk away from that scot-free. And she does feel remorse. I mean, please, if she weren't feeling remorse, then she would have clearly stepped from grey into like completely dark. But yeah, it's not enough, because she walks away scot-free. She's also not persecuted for the acts that she has performed during the war. And I understand not being able to weigh the different actions against one another. Of course, a ton of the Ryukyu have also done war crimes. A lot of them did it in under the charge of others, and so it's always like a weighing up of like who is responsible for those types of things. So if you are going to go after her, you have to go after the Ryuko as well, and then it just becomes this whole sort of a mess of trying to figure out who's more culpable and all of those things. And what they kind of really wanted was like a blank slate in which we're just gonna try and build something rather than bring things down. But it just feels very annoying to have Gia just walk away as if nothing happens. She moves off to this monastery where she spends the rest of her days dedicated to the healing arts. Like, good on you, but yeah, unsatisfying. I didn't need for her to die, but I do think I would have preferred the ending in which Firo blew her up. I'm just gonna say, like, I didn't feel like she had to die at the end of the book, but if I had to choose between an ending where Firo was successful in taking her down with him, or where she gets to walk away as if nothing happened, yeah, I know what I prefer in that scenario. But so, yeah, I think that is more or less what I have to say about this book, right? I greatly enjoyed it. There are aspects to it that don't fully work for me, like the explorations of inventions. I love the fact that they're doing that, and I like the fact of that they're like thinking through the mechanics that they have at their disposal and how to turn that into a new innovation, all of that. But there's just a lot of that there, and that is just like the places in which my mind would wander throughout this book. I frequently noticed that when it came to those sections, I wasn't fully paying attention to all of the steps in order for them to reach an innovation. And one thing that like probably I also feel is like the most, like the biggest qualm I have with this series is just that sometimes you have to wait such a long time before you get back to a character that you really enjoy, because of its kind of focusing each part, definitely from the third book onwards, I think probably already from the second one as well, where each part is kind of centered around certain characters and you're following them a ton in with that part, but then it might be like two further parts before you revisit them again later on, depending on how crucial that they are to the storyline. And you know, I didn't mind like stepping away from Gia for long periods of time, but characters like Savo, for example, I would have loved to see more from, or to have more throughout the book. I don't necessarily think that I would say that I would have done it differently or that it needed to be done differently, but I definitely felt an absence from time to time. I do also see why it was done that way, but that doesn't take away from the fact that oftentimes I was feeling like, where's Savo? I want this character back. And unfortunately we actually only met Savo in book 3, which is sad that my favorite character was only there for 2 books. But so yeah, that is gonna be my spoiler-filled vlog for the the Speaking Bones, because I think it's long already. And thank you for sitting through this all-time length movie. Nowadays movies are 3 hours, so I definitely didn't make it to movie length time yet. But if you're looking back to like old rom-com days, I think I made it there. So thank you very much if you're still here at the end of this video. Leave me your thoughts on the entirety of the Dandelion Dynasty down below. And definitely if you want to fire me up, try and defend Gia's actions, but if I don't respond, it's because I'm trying to think of how to be polite about that. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video and see you guys to the next one. Bye!